Hello everyone, good morning, good evening to all of you joining from different parts of the world. Hi Shweta, Tyagi, welcome you all to the Changemaker 20 Summit, the session, The Promise of Energy Efficiency in India and the Global South. Today we have with us Dr. Padu Padmanabhan with us, an enthusiastic advocate, writer, designer, and a planner devoted to sustainability development and energy conservation. He has worked with World Bank, USAID, and agencies of Government of India as well. He's an author of First Fuel, India's Energy Efficiency Journey, and a radical vision of sustainability. Welcome, Dr. Padmanabhan. It's a pleasure to have you here. So, sir, we have heard a lot about you. We have been following you. I have been following you on LinkedIn a lot, and I have a lot of questions for you to ask. And I'm sure we are going to have a very interesting session over here. So, let's get jumped into the session, and let's get started with our question and answer session. And Dr. Padmanabhan, I would like to know that, there is as we start with the evolution of energy as resources to sustainability development goals and energy efficiency. How does it work? I mean, the evolution of energy and all these energy efficiency. How does it work, sir?
Thank you, Shweta, for your kind introduction and for this conversation that we are going to have. Before I begin, I would like to thank the Changemaker team led by Amit Tuteja for supporting the G20 Indian presidency, as well as inviting me to this August gathering. Whenever I speak to different audiences, I'm drawn by the concern of the youth, specifically on climate change. Anguish and concern being felt by the climate collapsing around us. The melting of the polar ice, the floods, the storms, the heat waves, and so on. One of the purposes of this conversation, Shweta, is to talk about solutions that can minimize and help mitigate the reasons for this anguish and concern. 65% of the population of India and the global south is below 25 years. That is almost a quarter of the world's population, and a constituency that has a lot in stake and has the most in stake, actually. That is almost a quarter of the world's population and a constituency that is most in stake. That apart, it has young legs, the ability to direct the youthful energies, pursuits, to seek and implement solutions to climate change while pursuing careers in the rapidly unfolding area of clean energy and energy efficiency. Now, permit me to address your lead-off question, a very excellent question, if I might ask, that I might say, that combines three elements: energy efficiency as a resource, its interface with sustainable development goals, and thirdly, its evolution in India and the global south. Each of these elements can take a session by itself, but I'll be very, very brief. First, energy efficiency as a resource. See, energy efficiency is no different than oil or coal or gas or electricity. In fact, it is the cleanest energy resource known to man. And more energy has been saved through energy efficiency over the years than generated by fossil fuels. It is indeed what I would call as the first fuel. I recall in 2003, in a seminar which I happened to attend and addressed by the former Indian President Abdul Kalam, he mentioned that energy efficiency is the sixth fuel after coal, oil, gas, natural gas, renewables, and then he said energy efficiency. And that got some of us thinking. And we did some number crunching and found that actually it probably is the first fuel because more energy has been saved through energy efficiency that has been generated through oil and coal and so on. And coincidentally, around the same time, the International Energy Agency in Paris had done its own analysis in 11 of the 17 member countries and found that in these 11 countries, more energy actually has been saved through energy efficiency actions than has been produced through fossil fuels. And they called it the first fuel. So we were greatly encouraged over the fact that there was a global analysis done in this area. So that is the first point, that energy efficiency is a resource. The second point is that energy efficiency has multiple engagements that could materially advance the Sustainable Development Goals in at least 7 of its 17 goals. As a climate action through decarbonization, as a positive impact on health and well-being by improving internal air quality, indoor air quality rather. It can increase the availability of clean water through impactful energy-water nexus interventions. It can accelerate the adoption of clean energy through decarbonization and through renewables. It could advance energy efficiency, productivity, innovation, and strengthen infrastructure. It could introduce economies in the production and conservation of natural resources. And finally, the 7th goal is that it can advance sustainable cities and communities through the spread of energy efficient green buildings. So that's a very long list. It's like saying if one takes energy efficiency to its logical conclusion, the Sustainable Development Goals can piggyback on it. So that's my second point, that the Sustainable Development Goals can piggyback on energy efficiency. The third element of your question, the genesis and evolution of energy efficiency. And I would like to give the example of India, which could be quite illustrative. Actually, energy efficiency in India began sometime in the mid-60s before the energy crisis, and it began by an accident. And it all happened in the city of Mumbai, or Bombay it was called then. At that time, the textile industry in Bombay was in a dilemma. They were getting coal from Bengal, Bihar by railway wagons, and this availability of coal was not very reliable because these wagons, when they were negotiating the steep inclines of the Western Ghats, there were occasional accidents and coal supply was curtailed. That apart, the industry needed a lot of storage space to store the coal. And even in those days, I'm talking about the mid-60s, space was at a premium in Mumbai. Now, at the same time, as some old-timers might recall, in Mumbai, there were 2 private refineries which had come up in Chembur, Esso and Burma Shell. And both these refineries had excess of what they call as heavy bottoms or heavy furnace oil or fuel oil. And they did not know what to do with it. They wanted to get rid of it. And they said, what's better than marketing it to the textile industry, which needed to shift away from coal to another fuel? But there was a problem. The problem was Indian industry did not know how to use oil. Very few examples of oil use in industry was taking place. So Indian industry was again in a quandary, and the Planning Commission took cognizance of it. They invited the National Institute of Fuel Efficiency Services of the UK, who came in, set up a energy efficiency or fuel efficiency cell with the National Productivity Council, trained members of that cell, and they provided technical advice to textile industries and expanded it to other industries all over the country on how to switch over from coal to oil, and in the process, how to do it efficiently. So that was the beginnings of the fuel efficiency movement in the mid-60s or maybe 68, 69. And that came in very handy because in 1973, as you might recall, there was this Yom Kippur War where the prices of oil went up because the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries in the Middle East decided to raise the prices. And India was affected, as many other countries in the world were affected. At that time, India was importing 75% of its oil, which it continues to import to this day. And the quadrupling of oil costs was very, very harmful to the Indian economy because almost 80% of the export earnings was used in import of the single commodity in those days. So the government of India was very keen in exercising moderation and efficiency and economy in the use of oil. And they turned to whom? The National Petroleum Council, saying that you guys have got this fuel efficiency service, so can you all help set up an efficiency program in the country? That led to a partnership between the NPC and the oil companies in India, led by the Indian Oil, and established what is known as the Petroleum Conservation Research Association. And energy efficiency, or fuel efficiency, it was called in those days, was institutionalized. In the early 80s, after some experience in promoting efficiency in Indian industry, began the transition from fuel efficiency to energy conservation, and then finally to energy efficiency, a term which became quite commonplace by the late 80s. And that's the time when the energy audit function also matured in the country. Indian industry and corporate sector took up energy efficiency as part of corporate strategy, and that continues to this day. But there were some other transitions that also took place sometime in the 2010-15 framework. There was adoption of energy productivity as a strategy, where one looked at the value of energy. And I'll talk a little bit about it later if a question of that kind arises. And now in the last few years, especially after the Paris Agreement, the term now is decarbonization, net zero, and so on and so forth. So energy efficiency has really evolved over a period of time in the Indian context. And I just gave a kind of a bird's eye view as to how the process is.
Definitely, yeah. That was very interesting to know. And you talk about energy efficiency. So connect. I mean, there. My second question is very much related to what you have just said in your first answer. That why are I feel that there are very few talks on energy efficiency than renewable energy. What do you think? I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
That's an interesting question, Shweta. Actually, energy efficiency and renewable energy are two sides of the same coin. If we have to move to an era of a world dominated by fossil fuels as it is today to one dominated by renewable energy, then energy efficiency will be the foundation and the bridge to do so. For several reasons, but the key reasons are energy efficiency is cheaper than renewable energy in most instances and cheaper than conventional fuels in all instances. It is cheaper to generate a unit of power. It's cheaper to save a unit of power than to generate an equivalent amount of power. So that's one important point. And as I mentioned earlier, it is the cheapest energy resource known to mankind and the cleanest energy resource known to mankind. And it's of interest to the youth. And it is of interest to the youth, and I would like to focus on this in this question as well as in any other following question, because it requires a long supply chain of service providers to deliver energy efficiency. Energy efficiency involves people such as energy auditors, demand response experts, energy efficiency designers, energy equipment manufacturers, energy auditors, energy specialists, even people like industries and industry owners, housewives, in fact, transport drivers, and so on. In fact, anyone and everyone who uses energy or consumes energy is also a proponent and an advocate of energy efficiency. As is often said, it takes a village to save energy, but it takes just a single utility or a single company to supply energy. So, in spite of all these major advantages of energy efficiency, it takes a backseat for the reason that you mentioned. Hardly anyone talks about it. Definitely, there is much more discussion and debate and so on renewables than on efficiency. The supply side has always taken precedence over the demand side, whether supply on fossil fuels or supply as far as renewables is concerned. Everyone likes to cut the ribbon on a supply project. Rarely does an energy efficiency project get mentioned in the news. We have had in India for the last 35 to 40 years a ministry of renewable energy, first a department and then a ministry. On the other hand, energy efficiency has been relegated as a small department in a supply ministry, which is the Ministry of Power or Department of Power. So this has to change. And there are indications that now energy efficiency is now surfacing as a key strategy and is being discussed more. Not enough, but definitely more than what it used to be in the past.
Well, we hope to hear more about energy efficiency in the future. And let's go on to the next question. So, as we know that India has promised the world that it would go net zero by the year 2070. So, what does it mean? I mean, do you think that India's net zero emission by 2070 is even realistic? Is it even achievable? What are your comments, sir?
That is an interesting question, Shweta. You have asked me a question which really needs some pondering over. But the short answer to it is certainly achievable. It will be difficult, no doubt, but the payback would be significant in terms of climate security, energy security, and economic security and growth. It means growing our economy, creating jobs for the youth, while simultaneously reducing carbon emissions. That's what net zero could deliver. But it would require, to my mind, unprecedented effort in three fundamental areas. What are these? The first is that we need to recognize, and we need to recognize very clearly, that net zero is not simply a scientific or mathematical concept, as your question indicated. As you rightly said, it is defined as one that achieves net zero when the amount of energy released is no more than the amount taken away. That is the goal, the destination. The journey to achieve it is more important, or equally important. And that is not a mathematical process, but a societal, economic, technological, environmental, and even ethical and moral concept. In short, we need to prepare carefully in these domains. So this is my first fundamental point. The second point builds upon what I had said earlier about energy efficiency. The pincer edge in the short to medium terms must be energy efficiency. Several studies have shown that energy efficiency can meet at least 30 to 40% of our decarbonization goals. So an IEA study, the International Energy Agency study, I'm referring to them earlier when they came out with the concept first fuel. But this study showed that the global carbon emissions curve, if one were to plot the curve over a period of time, can be bent considerably to enable the world restrict global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade to mitigate and minimize climate change. And this can be done through interventions or what they call as 5 wedges. The first wedge is energy efficiency, then is renewables, then natural gas, then carbon capture and storage, and nuclear. But energy efficiency has the greatest potential among these 5 wedges, at least in the short to medium terms. And as I said, could save 30 to 40% of the decarbonization goals, or meet 30 to 40% of the decarbonization goals. But it is not simply for reducing carbon emissions, although that's what the thrust of net zero would be. But energy efficiency can also serve as a platform for renewable energy and make renewable energy cost effective. So there is that very important contribution of energy efficiency. My third and final point as far as net zero emissions by 2070 is concerned is to do with planning. It's an extension of my first point when I said that net zero is not simply a mathematical concept, but it also requires all these other domains. It's an extension of the concept, but is significant enough to be treated as a separate category. My contention is that one cannot predict what can happen on the future energy technologies. One cannot pick and choose winners, and we don't know what's going to happen 30, 40 years down the road. It could be advanced solar or hydrogen or nuclear fusion or some other. We don't know. So projecting over a 50-year time period is fraught with uncertainties. Instead, we need to plan for a shorter time span of, say, 5 to 8 years or maybe 10 years, and build flexibility so that we can make course corrections as we go along. This has also the advantage of having realistic short-term goals that, when met, can help us bend our carbon emissions curve and set the trajectory for the future. Setting the trajectory for the future has to happen now, between now and 2030, to influence what will happen in 2070, and the choice of the technologies to be developed and implemented at scale, at speed and scale, will change according to the economies of the times. So these are the three things which need to be in place broadly if we have to achieve our net zero emissions by 2070. Yeah.
I agree with you, Dr. Padmanabhan, the trajectory that you have just shared with us. And meanwhile, I just want to add a little brief for the audience who are joining in and asking questions. We will be taking your questions in a while, so keep posting your questions. Know that we are reading it, and we will definitely be. I will definitely ask these questions to Dr. Padmanabhan. So keep posting them. And with that, we have a very interesting question that how can everyone contribute to be a part of energy efficiency, as we know that this is a youth summit? So what are the opportunities for youth in this? The job opportunities, and how can, even if somebody not from this background, can contribute to it?
As I mentioned earlier, or at least alluded to earlier, that energy efficiency is everybody's business. And therefore, it is a decentralized decision-making process, unlike supply of energy, which is highly centralized. Think for a moment, if you want to set up, let's say, 1,000-megawatt power plant, you just need to get in touch with 4 or 5 agencies. You need to get in touch with the utility, the supplier of the fuel, the local government, and probably with the environmental agencies. And of course, with the supplier of the energy power plant equipment. And with this, you can set up this power plant in a period of 3 to 5 years. Now, if you want to save 1,000 megawatts of power, assuming you want to work on the demand side of the energy equation and save 1,000 megawatts of power, and that's a lot of power, then you have a very, very long list of entities who have to be involved. And these are the entities who are concerned with the using of energy. They are the customers, whether it's industry, whether it's transport, whether it's agriculture, whether housewives, etc. And you have to also put in place a number of functional responsibilities and jobs to deliver on the potential for energy efficiency available among these end users. So one has to create jobs up and down the supply chain. This large supply chain, there will be a lot of startups coming up these days. A lot of interesting algorithms and data analysis jobs are coming up. The field of load research is very, very exciting to understand how energy and electricity particularly is used, who contributes to peak power, what can be done to reduce peak power, what can be done to shift peak power. These kind of analysis is what utilities require, and these are jobs available for energy analysts. And this apart from the job for energy auditors, the job for measurement and verification experts, with carbon markets now coming up, the job for carbon market and trading, the jobs required for energy efficiency equipments, variety of equipment. Many equipments can be retrofitted with energy efficient devices. So all of that. So basically, if you were to put up a megawatt of power, you can employ 6 people. If you were to save a megawatt, you can employ something like 600 people. It's 1:100 almost. So there are many jobs in the offing if you have an energy efficiency, clean energy market. And not to speak of the fact that energy efficiency can stimulate the growth of renewables, and there are a lot of jobs available in the renewable energy market too. So put together, clean energy offers you far more amount of jobs per megawatt of energy saved, either through substitution, that is renewables, or through efficiency by end-use practices than you would get on the supply side. So I think the youth can be drawn in to do many of these things for the reasons I mentioned. They've got young legs, and they are adventurous spirit. So one can tap into both those potentials.
Definitely, sir. And with that, I want to take this question. We have Akshat Manotra's question. His question is, I am 13-year-old warrior. Akshat. My question is how India can safeguard itself from the upcoming events of global warming by investing in efficient and renewable energy. I wanted to take this question because it's a youth question, so just yeah.
What did you say his age was?
He's 13-year-old, sir.
He's 13-year-old young youth, just the target audience that
Yes.
I would love to talk to. Well, there are many, and what's his good name?
Akshat. Akshat.
Well, Akshat, thank you for this question, and it's a very interesting question and a very valid question. How can you, as a young citizen of the country, actually be a model as far as energy use is concerned? When you look around you, you see that you yourself are consuming energy at home, while in school, and even when you're pursuing certain hobbies and habits of yours. And in each of these areas which you're consuming energy, you'll have to see whether you're doing it efficiently or inefficiently. Are you being responsible or irresponsible? Now, for instance, I'll give you an example. Doesn't mean you're doing that, but just to get you excited and interested. Can you do an energy audit in your house? For instance, if you have an electricity bill and the bill is because of the energy that you consume at home, the electricity you consume at home, and you consume at home in energy in the kitchen, electricity in the kitchen, electricity for lighting, electricity for air conditioning, electricity for water pumping, if at all you're pumping water up from your sump to the storage tank upstairs. And in each of this, how much are you consuming? That would mean you'll have to do a little bit of a homework, find out what is the capacity of the fans, capacity of the lights, and then do some number crunching And I don't have the time to go through all those mathematics, but they're all available in books, so you can easily understand them and find out how much energy you're using. So if you're using, for every 100 units of energy, if you're using 30 units for lighting, 30 units for air conditioning, remaining 40 units for other activities at home, particularly in the kitchen, then you'll say, okay, lighting is consuming 30 units, that's a lot. So can I go in for LEDs, light emitting diodes, instead of incandescent lamps? They're far more efficient. They can save you 75% energy. Air conditioners are consuming a lot of energy. Can I go in for star rated air conditioners, 5-star rating air conditioners that consume less energy than single star or 2-star rated consumers? And not only that, not only equipment change, but are you switching off the air conditioner when you leave the room? Are you setting the thermostat a little higher during winter time so that you don't have to kind of cool the house more than necessary? If you're keeping it at 72 degrees Fahrenheit, that's too low. Can you put it at 78 or 80 degrees Fahrenheit? And then can you reverse that in winter in case you're having room heating? In India, we don't have too much of room heating, we have more room cooling. That's why I gave you the example of raising the thermostat rather than depressing the thermostat. These are two measures. And not only that, this is all inside the house. Outside, when you're going to school, are you all going by car, and is the car driven by your driver and you yourself sitting alone in the car, or can you carpool with your friends so that 5 or 6 of you all can get together? Or better still, is the school giving transportation requirement, meeting a transportation requirement by a school bus? Because in that case, you consume less energy to reach school rather than go in a car by yourself. Then when you're in school, there's a whole lot of things you can do. The same thing, you could do an energy audit in school to find out how much energy has been consumed in classrooms, in the playground, in the auditorium, energy consumed for air conditioning, energy consumed for lighting, energy consumed for pumping. The same analysis that you did at home in a smaller scale, you'll do it on a larger scale in school. And in school, you'll also have your friends helping you. So you all can divide yourself into different teams. One team can look at just the lighting, one can look at the air conditioning, one can look at renewable energy, etc., etc. So if you really think about it, this is also not enough. You can then implement some of these measures. After you implement the measure, you'll find out that in energy saved, because you've monitored the energy, right? You put up meters to see how much you consume before and then how much you consume after. And you say, wow, I've saved 100 units of energy. Now you publicize that. You go around and tell people, we saved 100 units of energy. We spent hardly about 500 rupees to do that, or 5,000 rupees to do that. Payback is, just a year or less than a year. It's a fantastic investment. It's money which is lying on the ground. I just picked it up. It's that kind of a thing. So you spread the word around. And there are many, many more things. But I think you get the drift, Akshat, of what I'm telling you, that you have to be an energy efficiency warrior. And once you do this and get excited, interested, involved, and get your friends excited, interested, involved, and get your parents to back you, then you can set up an energy efficiency community. And this community can then grow and then do many wonderful things down the road. You're only 13. You've got many, many years ahead of you. So I hope I've answered your question.
That was really great. I'm so happy to see. Oh yes, Akshay, please go ahead.
Yes, Akshay, would you like to say something?
No, sir, I just wanted to say thank you so much for answering my question. It really helped a lot. I will surely take all these measures you said and inculcate these values in my life. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Akshat, and I'm going to follow up with that. So you really have to do what you said you will do. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that lovely question.
Thank you, Akshat. And I must say, yes, I was about to say that energy efficiency really needs a behavioral change. And looking at a 13-year-old talking like this, I'm sure we will achieve it. So coming to our next question, sir. So I have seen your book, Force Fuel. You are an author of Force Fuel. Can you talk about that book a little more? I didn't have a chance to jump into and read that book, but I would love to hear some, some insights about that book.
Thank you, Shweta. It was actually during the pandemic in 2020 when the idea struck me that possibly I can spend my time more usefully in writing a book. And the reason was I had the time, but more than that, whenever you go to any library, you'll find that there are rows of books on energy. But most of these books are on the supply side of the energy equation. You have books on coal, you have books on the power sector, the reform of the power sector, and books on the oil industry, and so on and so forth. And there are a lot of them, both in the Indian context as well as in the global south context, as well as in the global context. There are very few books on energy efficiency, and if at all there are books on energy efficiency, they're very technical. They're case studies as to how much energy was saved by company X or company Y. There are energy audit manuals which give you detailed technical instructions on how to do energy audits and so on and so forth. But there are very few, if any, books on energy efficiency and the evolution of energy efficiency, as I described earlier, and the history of energy efficiency, particularly from the point of view of institutions and personalities, people who have really contributed to the cause. And the reason why I mentioned this is the youth of today need to be not just educated about efficiency, but also need to be told as to the history of efficiency and the contribution of the youth, the contribution of several personalities, individuals, institutions, and so on. So, with that in mind, I wrote the book, and I was quite pleased that a well-known publisher, Macmillan, agreed to publish it. And in 2021, within a period of a year, the book was published. It is available on Amazon here in the US as well as in India. And the book covers the history of energy efficiency, but more than that, it covers a lot of anecdotes and narratives and stories. It doesn't have any tables and charts. I decided so that it's not going to be a typical book. So there's no table, no charts, no equations. There are technical descriptions, but only for the layman. It is dumbed down so that people can understand. But it's more about, as I said, case examples of efficiency. The two things, there are many case examples, but two come to mind. One is the history of the evolution of green buildings in India and how it all began, and how India is number 2 in the world with 13.5 billion square feet of green building space after the United States, which is about 18 billion square feet. And India is slated to overtake even the United States in another 7 to 10 years. And we had, in 2000, the first green building was 20,000 square feet, which is not even 0.001% of what it is today. How did we get to almost 13.5 billion square feet, covering about 10,000 buildings? That history is extremely fascinating. And similarly, there is experience on cogeneration and how India built its cogeneration potential on coal and clean coal, and how India adopted clean coal technologies and power plants, and so on and so forth. There are very many examples.
Yes, and I've also, read one of your articles which is reimagining energy efficiency. So, in that, what is the capacity and capability of current administrative policies and executive machinery associated with energy efficiency in India to deliver and to fully capture the multiple benefits of energy saving? Can you talk a little more about this? I mean, I have definitely read it, but it would be...
I'll be very brief because this is a short-term question, which is, I think, again, the questions you have chosen could be better. You've done a great job, Shweta, in thinking through this. See, it's important, and I'll answer the first part of your question. It's important to reimagine energy efficiency. Energy efficiency of the past is relevant today, but there are other dimensions and directions in which the country ought to move. India has done reasonably well in adopting energy efficiency in the industrial sector. And I'll talk about the industrial sector a little bit because it provides opportunities for answering this question. The question normally asked in an industry by top management is, how is energy used? If you talk to a top manager, and even at homes for that matter, or in any other commercial building, how is the energy being used? And the answer is simple and straightforward. And we have been following up on that answer since the dawn of the oil crisis of the 70s. How is energy being used? Yeah, we're using it. We do an energy audit. We find out where energy is being consumed most, and then zero in that area and look at ways in which one can reduce energy consumption in that area. And this is simple, straightforward, well-known, and as I said, corporate India has turned it into a very fine art. And indeed, other than small and medium-scale industry where there's a lot of potential yet to be untapped, corporate India has moved reasonably well in this area. And some plants like cement plants and some petrochemical plants and others are probably among the most efficient in the world. Now, the question is, can we ask another question, which actually makes us reimagine efficiency completely different. Instead of saying, how is energy used? We'll ask the question, what is the energy used for? The moment you ask the question, what is the energy used for, then you look at what value energy brings to the table. Now, industry is there for value enhancement. They would like to enhance the value received from every unit of energy consumed. Value could be in terms of revenues. So, taking that logic further, an industry, let's say manufacturing aluminum ingots, gets certain value when they sell those aluminum ingots in the market. But they could get a lot more value if they were to sell fuselages made of aluminum or sell some other aspect of aluminum used in the domestic sector, such as fixtures and so on. If they're making mild steel, would they be satisfied with just making mild steel, or would they like to go and make alloy steel, and then which is used in precision machine tools? Will they be happy in making cardboard, or go further and make paper, which is much more valuable, paper which is such as, let us say, toilet paper, or probably toilet paper is not a good example, but paper which is
tissue paper,
or etc. Yeah. So the question is, you go up the value chain, and as you go up the value chain, you create more value for your industry, and by creating more value for your industry, you use the energy more productively. So the sum total of what I'm trying to say, and to be brief about it, is you go beyond energy efficiency to the concept of energy productivity, the value that energy gives to your bottom line, rather than the amount of energy saved, which is important, contributes to improvement of energy productivity, but the greater improvement of energy productivity will be through moving towards high value items, which means moving towards modernization, moving towards reorganization, moving towards reconstitution of your production process, and so on and so forth. That's how we begin to reimagine energy efficiency. And I have discussed that in some detail in the book as to how Indian industry and Indian corporates can adopt energy productivity as their strategy to save energy, rather than look at the narrow aspect of energy efficiency. The last point I'd like to make is, energy efficiency is what I would call as a boiler room subject. it is something done at a shop floor. Energy productivity requires top-line investment, so it is a boardroom subject. So the challenge of Indian industry is to move from the boiler room to the boardroom. And to do that, one would have to incorporate different set of skills which will advance issues such as modernization and restructuring and so on and so forth. Now, this discussion we had on this question may not immediately appeal to the youths because it's not something that they would be involved in. But believe me, the time would come when the youths would actually spearhead value addition in this country through startups and so on. And their understanding of how energy is used rather than how it is used will become very important. So in that context, it does make sense for them to at least have an appreciation as what is energy used for, rather than only look at how is energy used. Although they must begin their career in energy efficiency by looking at how is energy used, what practices can be followed, what technologies can be adopted, and then as they get more familiar with the subject, move into the broader strategic question of what is the energy used for.
That was really insightful, sir. And I would like to take one more question from the audience. This is Sakshi Thakur. The question is, this is indeed interesting, like how small steps and mindful use of energy can save energy. How can we gain more knowledge and make mindful choices? Do you suggest educational institute to impart knowledge on this front?
Well, educational institutions can play a role, and indeed, many educational institutions have set up energy departments, in energy and environment departments, and energy efficiency is a subject which is taught in these educational institutions. But as you can see from my earlier comments, energy efficiency is out there. It's not just in books and reading. They can prepare you in terms of having an understanding of how energy is used, but then you have to really go out in the field and make a study yourself. And each person would have his own experience. You know, energy efficiency could be a life calling. It could be a way to make a measurable change in the destinies of countries. As we discussed earlier, when you asked me this question on net zero, how energy efficiency can help India meet its net zero objectives by 2070, and clearly energy efficiency has a clear role. But it can make a difference in the destinies of the world, of the country, and of individuals. So that's a top-down approach and a top-down answer, but a bottoms-up answer for those who are embarking on a career on energy efficiency. What does it mean? What does it offer? We know that there are job opportunities. We know that one can kind of get involved in one or the other job up and down the supply chain, as I mentioned. But let me provide you an example, a real-life example. A few years back, when I was writing my book, I met up with the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, and the founder of one of India's largest energy service companies. And I asked him this question as to what got him to work in this area. And he told me something very interesting. He said it was in the early 70s when he was working as an engineer in an industry in Delhi. It was a chemical industry in Delhi. He was visited by an energy efficiency expert, a fuel efficiency expert. This was in 73, 74, 75. And this expert came with a small bag in his hand. In it, there was a handkerchief, a thermocouple, and a gas analyzer. These are the three things, very rudimentary equipment. And with these three equipments, starting with the handkerchief and the gas analyzer and the thermocouple, this expert went round the boiler house of the industry this person was working in and was able to, through detection of a whole lot of things, like taking the temperature of a patient, a doctor takes it, and taking the blood pressure and taking the blood analysis, the doctor can prescribe medicines. So similarly, this expert looked at the gas analysis of the flue gases leaving the chimney and said, oh man, you're using a lot more air than you ought to, so you can cut down on the air. We looked at the thermocouple and looked at the temperature of the sides of the boiler and said the brickwork is very hot, so you can reduce the heat losses from there. And he took the handkerchief to find out where air is leaking into the furnace, because wherever air was leaking into the furnace, the handkerchief was being sucked in, and said, this is where you need to plug those leaks. And through all these measures, and there was a laundry list of technical measures, they were able to save 30% of oil in that particular industry, or coal rather, in that particular boiler. This gentleman was fascinated. He's saying, just with a handkerchief and such rudimentary equipment, if you can do that, there's something more to it. So he looked into the subject, and later in life, he set up an energy service company, which is one of India's largest energy service companies, employs hundreds of people. And of course, they don't use handkerchief and thermocouples and gas analyzers, although they do use gas analyzers, but they're much more sophisticated. And they certainly don't use thermocouples. Rather, they don't use handkerchiefs. They use draft gauges and stuff like that. And they use a lot of automation and computers and so on. And they've automated the energy out of the process. But he said that was a life-changing time when he saw what could be done through simple application of principles of science to saving energy, and decided that that will be the direction in which his career would go. So I just thought I'd give this as an example to motivate the youth that one doesn't have to have sophisticated instruments and so on to do efficiency. One can start with the basics.
Wow, sir, that was really, really interesting and sort of motivating as well, I'm sure, the story. So moving ahead with the, we are coming to the end of our session, and I would like to know what is your, I know you have talked a lot about youth and everything, but coming to an end, what is your message to the youth? How they can, be a part of them? What is your message in general?
As you rightly said, I've referred to the youth in my discussion, and the message to the youth is being to be adventurous. The energy field is a very exciting field, be it on supply or be it on demand side. On supply, obviously, the renewable field is very exciting and interesting. But if you have to make renewables cost effective, then you have to implement measures on the efficiency side. Can you imagine putting up a solar rooftop system of, let us say, 10 watts or let's say 100 watts, and then find that 80 watts is used in lamps, which are most inefficient? And it doesn't make any sense to me. So you need to do a lot on the lighting side before you start investing on the production for solar. These opportunities for efficiency exist all around you. Some of it is in your neighborhood, some of it is in your home, and in youth, for the reasons that I mentioned when this young boy of 13 asked me questions as to what can be done. Well, we discussed that. The opportunity to make a difference through energy efficiency, to meet our decarbonization goals in order to address climate change, is an opportunity that comes once in a lifetime to generations. Since efficiency is there for the asking, literally, it is something that the youth can be involved in first in terms of giving back to the country and to the community. But it's not just being socially conscious, although that's very important. It is also having your eye and mind on a career which can reap a whole lot of benefits, because cost of energy is going to increase over a period of time, and it has already increased. So many of the measures which I'm talking about are cost effective, but people need to be guided. And here's an opportunity for the youth to master this field and to deliver on efficiency. That will be my message. And my entire talk, in a sense, is the message, particularly the one how a CEO of an energy service company, how he was influenced when he was a youth, and today is one of the founders of one of India's largest energy service companies. And there are many, many more examples of that kind. So that's my message, that the youth can really gird up their loins and take the efficiency movement further, faster, with speed and scale. The question is speed and scale. The youth have the legs to take it at speed and the vigor to take it at scale.
Well, that was really, really insightful, sir. I really enjoyed this session, and I'm sure that the youth or anybody who will be watching this session live or recording will definitely learn a lot about energy efficiency and what they need to do ahead in the future. So, seeing that we are almost on time, and I would like to thank you, sir. It was really a pleasure to have you at Changemaker 20 Summit and to be a part of this session, to talk to you in person. And it was just a pleasure to be in contact with you, sir.
Well, Shweta, the pleasure is entirely mine. The question that you asked really made for a very interesting conversation. Thank you very much, and thanks the team from Changemaker 20, and this team for giving us this opportunity to have this very interesting conversation.
Yes, sir. Even I want to thank the Changemaker team, the tech team who are taking care of this session online while we are sitting here in US when there is night. So thank you, the tech team and everybody.